Well, the Gonzaga Bulldogs have a excellent non-conference schedule lined up for the 22-23 season, filled with a bunch of very talented programs. Here to break down the incoming freshman classes for those teams and how they might challenge Mark Few is recruiting analyst Jason Jordan of Sports Illustrated, right here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Don't go away.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome to the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. I'd like to thank LinkedIn Jobs for being the official college recruiting sponsor across the Locked On College Network. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Thrilled again to be joined by Jason Jordan of Sports Illustrated. Jason, kind of a quiet week for the Zags on the recruiting trail. Gives us kind of a fun opportunity to look at some of Gonzaga's non-conference opponents this season, specifically their incoming recruiting classes. Gonzaga played a lot of these teams last year, so these are kind of going to be the new guys that they haven't seen yet. And I was looking at your class rankings that you did a couple months ago, and I'm sure a few things have changed since then, but I think a lot of Gonzaga fans would probably be surprised that the class that was ranked the highest by basically every media outlet, including your own rankings, was Alabama, and the class that they put together under Coach Nate Oats. I'm wondering if you could kind of give us a little bit about what that class looks like for that squad.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of versatility and, a lot of depth. You have Jaden Bradley, who was one of the best point guards in the country last year, ran the show for IMG. And he's just, big 6'4" point guard who knows his role. And I think that's where he shines. Like, he's not a guy who's going to command a lot of shots, but he does operate in the quarterback mode. And so he'd much rather have 10 assists than 10 points. Right. So that's his whole mindset, and that's what makes him so special. And, the way he spaces the floor and, controls pace and dictates tempo is just really masterful. And that's why he was a McDonald's All-American and, one of the top players, not just point guards, but one of the top players in the country. And then Brandon Miller's he's the star of that class, 6'7", long, wiry, scores on all three levels super efficiently, as you've probably seen some clippings in the in the preseason, right? So he's been doing that for years, and it's just carried over. But he has like an NBA game, right? So he's going to check off a lot of boxes on both ends of the floor, but definitely on the offensive end, he's going to be a matchup problem because he's so athletic and so dynamic, and his motor it's like, Brandon, you got to relax. He doesn't know he doesn't have an off switch. Yeah. So, that's a great thing too.
Yeah. It's funny. I was at the Gonzaga Alabama game last year in Seattle. I know a lot of other people listening to the show were at that game. And I can tell you confidently that Gonzaga fans hearing that Alabama's got some more big, physical, athletic guards coming is not something that Zags fans are particularly excited about.
Yeah.
What really hurt them last year was the games that some of those guys had against them last year was really, really challenging. So Nate Oats seems like they're doing it again over there in Alabama.
Yeah, I mean, players love Nate Oats, man. They love the system, and they love the quick offense. They love there are no bad shots way of thinking. And, you talk about big, strong, athletic guys. Noah Clowney's another guy in that class who's going to check off a lot of boxes, kind of like a floating forward, but he's big and physical. And then Rylan Griffin is a dynamic guard who plays with a chip on his shoulder. So he'll be a big player for them in the years to come. So that's a special class. I think we had him ranked number 4, and I would keep him there even though things have changed. That's a really good class.
Yeah. So Zags got Bama in Birmingham, and then they got Texas on the road as well. And Texas, another team, really excellent recruiting class, top 10 per your rankings. I imagine Dylan Mitchell has a lot to do with that. We know he's going to be an excellent player. But can you tell me a little bit about him and what that whole class looks like for Chris Beard in his second year?
Yeah, I love Dylan Mitchell, man. I thought on that Montverde team that he played on, which won the national title, because they
Mhm.
always win the national title.
Yeah.
But he played with our player of the year, who was Derek Whitehead, who most
Mhm.
people know is headed to Duke.
Yep.
While Derek was definitely man, it was tough like that.
Yeah.
I don't know if Dylan wasn't the best player on that team, let's say the most impactful player on that team, because when we talk about checking off a lot of boxes, I mean, he's 6'8", and he tries to downplay the athleticism because he doesn't want to get typecast. I get that,
Mhm.
but that's his, that's where he shines, right? Just I like to describe him as super productive,
Yeah.
right? Like, so I feel like if I don't, then I'm gonna miss something, right? So he
Mhm.
just because he impacts the game in ways that you can't tally. I mean, the coaches tally deflections and stuff, but stuff like that we don't throw those stats out.
Right.
But he changes shots. He's a rim protector even at 6'8".
Mhm.
And he's super aggressive on both ends of the floor. I mean, he's definitely over the last year he's developed more perimeter skills, and but he really thrives down there as an agile,
Mhm.
like a floating four who's great off the high post, and can maneuver in that paint and get putbacks. He's great off that second leap on the offensive glass, and he's just a dynamic, productive player, and he's going to be a headache. He's going to be a headache in year one right alone. And then they got Arterial Morris, who's also a great player. Big time shot maker, super physical guy, has a football background. So he's super tough finishing through contact. But he's knocking that perimeter shot down very efficiently. And so he's going to be a guy who's also, I think um he's drawn a lot of comparisons to Marcus Smart.
Mhm.
So he plays in that mold, and
Mhm.
a guy who's definitely gonna make a big impact for Beard in year one.
It's funny. We look at Texas, and they kind of disappointed a little bit last year. They had a bunch of transfers, and it seemed like it
Yeah.
took them a while to put the pieces together. How important is it for this upcoming season for Beard and the staff to kind of show that they can get some high level
Yeah.
recruits in, which they already did, and that they can really kind of get them into the system and get them, because a couple of
Right.
years of not performing well, especially a school like Texas, and people turn
Yeah.
on you pretty quick. So how important is this
Oh
for Beard?
yeah. I know a couple past coaches that would definitely co-sign that statement.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, it's very important. It's very important because people had their reservations about all the transfers, and then
Mhm.
it's one of those things where I think we've talked about this before, or I've talked about on different podcasts, where if you're going to get a bunch of transfers, well, it
Mhm.
better work.
Yeah.
Because it's like, you should, because it's easy, it's low hanging fruit if it
Mhm.
doesn't, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, you shouldn't have done that. That's not good. That's a
Mhm.
melting pot. You shouldn't do that, right? It's only good if it works.
Right.
And
Of
so when
course.
it doesn't work, to your point, they're going to turn fast. But I think he has Dylan's a system guy, right?
Mhm.
So he's gonna ultimately buy in. Arterio, he's a little bit more of a wild card, but what he does on the court is definitely going to mesh well with what Chris Beard wants to do. I mean, he's a gritty bulldog of a guard who
Mhm.
can score, right? So those two guys with those mindsets, I think they'll mesh well in the system, and I think they'll have it won't take as long to gel well, and ultimately have great results coming down the road this season.
All right. Well, Jason and I are going to come back in the second segment. We're going to take a look at a few more of Gonzaga's freshman opponents this upcoming season. But before we do that, I want to tell you all about Bet Online. College basketball may be deep into the offseason, but college football and the NFL are just right around the corner, while the WNBA playoffs are just getting started and the MLB is not far behind. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your betting needs and sports information. From all the latest odds, contests, and player props, you name it. BetOnline remains the best spot for all your latest sports developments, including podcasts and reviews for all of the leagues this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sports wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. They even have lines on coaching changes across every major sport, so even in the offseason, you can get your fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags, still chatting here with Sports Illustrated recruiting analyst Jason Jordan, talking about the incoming recruiting classes for Gonzaga's non-conference opponents this season. We talked about Texas and Alabama in the first segment. Next up is, of course, Gonzaga's favorite opposing head coach, John Calipari, and the Kentucky Wildcats. They came in at number 12 on your rankings a couple months ago, Jason. I didn't have a very large class, but I suspect that Carson Wallace and Chris Livingston are just that good that this class is going to be ranked really high, even if they didn't have that many guys coming in. Is that more or less where we're at with this?
Yeah. Quite top heavy there. But I mean, if you're going to get them, get those two. Cason's a bulldog, man. One of the best, at the McDonald's All-American game, most people probably don't know this, but you gauge more at the practices. The NBA scouts don't come to the game, they come to the practices, and that's for a reason. They really get after it. And I was, of the guards there, Kaysen was probably one in my top three, him and Nick Smith. And because Kaysen is a guy who competes in everything, like they were doing drills. I mean, he wanted to be the best, and especially in the scrimmages, he was definitely getting after it. He would take on the assignment of guarding the best guard on which, I mean, that's a plethora. But he would, whoever was getting off, he'd be like, I got them. He's that guy, right? And so that mentality, just coupled with his dynamic skill set. I mean, I think he's got a football background too early on, and most of those Texas guys do. But they just fit a mold, and he is a guy who's not going to be denied when he's going downhill. So he's getting to the rack. But he also makes, I think what's really underrated about him is his ability to make plays and his vision. I mean, he's a really good passer, makes a lot of great decisions. So he's a high IQ guy with the ball. Definitely a guy who you want the ball in his hands in crunch time when the shot clock is winding down. He's going to make a good decision. And then Chris Livingston, he took a lot of lumps over the summer because he didn't have a great summer. But he really came out, and I thought he played well. And he knew that. I talked about that. We talked about that after the summer, and he knew that. And I was really curious to see how he would handle, the end of his senior year. And he really answered the call and had a really productive and really good year on an Oak Hill team that had a lot of stars. So he's a guy who's big, 6'7", and he can stretch the defense. Shot got better during the high school season. So he's a streaky shooter, but he's also a great rebounder toward the area, and he's always attacking the glass, and he can guard multiple positions. So he's going to be a productive guy for John. I think both of them will be productive in year one, and they'll be hell to deal with. And I'm sorry to tell you, super talented in a variety of different ways, and guys that are going to give you headaches for sure.
Yeah, it's obviously we kind of talked about it a little bit with Chris Beard. Calipari certainly has a lot more. He got a little more cachet, a little bit more willingness. People are going to be a little bit more willing to let him not do well. But after losing to a 15 seed last year, certainly I'm guessing that there's a little bit more tension. There's a little bit more urgency, I suppose. Looking at this class, obviously two really, really talented players. Calipari's not going to get canned anytime soon. I doubt that. But at what point do you start wondering, like, it's great that you can recruit? Right. Duke and Kentucky have the top recruiting classes of the last couple decades, basically. But at what point does that not matter anymore? Like, you got to start winning games. You got to start being in the Final Four consistently, and this team hasn't done that.
Right, and to your point, it was the same thing with Duke, and then and last year they got saved. You know what I'm saying? Like in the final ride, they got to the Final Four. So to your point, it's cool, and it's cool like now, like so. July, oh my God, we just landed the top point guard. August, September, but okay, cool. All right, so we're gonna win, right?
Yeah.
Well, we'll get to that, but I think Final Four is the mark.
Yeah.
To make fans happy and shut them up. Losing to a 15 seed is not the mark.
Nope.
And they know that.
Yeah.
They've really. I'm telling you, they're going all in for 2023. I mean, they want to erase that stench for sure. So I think the message has been received, and I'm expecting a lot of big things from them this season.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of teams that have won, that have found success, even if they maybe don't have as high level of recruiting, that's Scott
Yeah.
Drew and the Baylor Bears. A very excellent program that they have built over there. Only 2 players committed for 2022, but one of them is Kiante George. And Kiante George just looks like he's going to be one of the best players in college basketball next season. His performance this summer was jaw-dropping. He looked fantastic. We know that Scott Drew develops guards like this extremely well. What is your impression of him, and how much trouble is he going to give the Zags?
He's going to give you a lot of trouble. Now, I talked to you about the top guards at McDonald's, right? And so Casey was one of them. Well, Kiante might have probably been the best. And I'll tell you what, we could talk about the meticulous stuff about his game. He scores on all 3 levels, the typical stuff, right? So he's got all that. Let's just say he's got all that. The biggest thing, I always say this about Kiante, the biggest thing about him is he doesn't think. Catch what I'm saying? He doesn't think he's the best player on the court. He knows it. He knows it all the time.
Yeah.
And so he plays that way. Like he plays like mentality wise, he has the Mamba mentality. I mean, he says this, he uses the moniker, but he and it engulfs him. He is that. He exudes that in every way. And that's what makes him special. And so you see in the preseason, he's already leading them in scoring most games. And, he's going to be a guy, and he's got everything. He's got great size. He's an efficient scorer from 3. And then the thing, that puts him over the top with other stars and more in his peers is that at the end of the game, he's efficient at the end of the game. As you saw in his senior year, he had like 3 buzzer beaters in big games. I mean, against Mount Bird, like he beat them twice by almost by himself. He really puts team. He has the ability to put a team on his back and carry them to the winner's circle. And in that, to your point, in that system, those tough, gritty guards that can really fill it up and get it done. He just fits that mold, and he's going to do very well in that system.
Yeah, and that it seems like a really, really good fit for him. And my main, I guess I was going to say question, but fear or concern, if Scott Drew is going to start getting dudes like this, like, is this going to become like a powerhouse? I mean, they're already pretty close to a powerhouse program, but it seems like if they're just starting to scratch the surface of these really high level recruits, they're going to be a legitimate problem for potentially a long time. Yeah,
I'm telling you, I talk to kids all the time, and they love, Drew's just, I mean, the kids love him. Kids love him. And to your point, they've already got, they're already keeping it going in 2023. They have Jacoby Walter, Myra Little, and they in 2024, they just got Asamato, and he's one of the top dynamic guards there. So, they're definitely a juggernaut on the recruiting trail, and they will be for years to come.
One of the next teams I wanted to talk about, not as highly ranked, the Michigan State program. Obviously, Tom Izzo, a staple, been around for decades at this point. Pretty small class. Jackson Kohler, Trey Holloman was kind of the main 2 guys there. I'm kind of curious. Michigan State has often been more of a veteran kind of leaning team. They play some of the older guys a little bit. Is that more what you expect this year, or do you kind of think these 2 guys are going to have an impact early for Izzo?
I've always liked Jackson. And people know that. I talked about him before. 6'10", big body, definitely fits the Michigan State mold of a big, very productive, scores with both hands. And Trey's a guy who had, he almost had to choose between football and basketball. So he's a tough nosed guard, a guy who you're going to see Tom Izzo screaming at on the sideline, and he's going to be able to take it because that's how Michigan State guards are required. That's how they're wired, right? I do think they'll contribute in that system. I do because I think they're really talented, and I think they're really good pieces. So I don't expect them to be all league or lead them in scoring or anything like that, but I think they'll be contributors, and I think they'll be good pieces for that system this season.
Last player / team that I wanted to talk about, we've kind of been highlighting the non-conference schedule. I'm going to dip into the conference schedule a little bit with BYU. Two players added to their class. One of them is Colin Chandler. He's a top 40 player in the class of 2022. Certainly BYU doesn't often have super high ranking recruits, but occasionally they'll get pretty high level guys. Chandler looks like a guy who's going to have a nice impact for Coach Mark Pope in their final year in the WCC.
Yeah. I was a little, I know people were saying he was going there.
Yeah.
I tell you, when he committed there, I was like, wow, that's a big one.
Yeah.
He's just a dynamic scorer.
Yeah.
Great size. I think he goes 6'4", but he's probably closer to 6'5".
Yeah.
So he really knows how to shoot over the top of the defense. But a lot of people say he's a shooter. They label him a shooter, but I just think he's a playmaker and scorer, and he knows how to score the ball. And
Mhm.
I think he's a guy he's going to be that guy in your conference who's going to be a killer. And
Mhm.
I think he'll do that from day one too. I mean, he's an assassin.
Yeah.
Like, that's where he's going to make his money, obviously, from the three. But he's a really good playmaker and
Mhm.
an amazing piece, a big get for the
Yeah.
program.
Yeah.
1,000%. I've always been very impressed with his game.
I want to switch gears on you for the final segment here, Jason. Kind of talk a topic that we've touched on a little bit in some of our previous conversations, but really wanted to talk about kind of the impact that the transfer portal has had on certain aspects of recruiting. We know that it has had an impact on high school recruiting. We also know that the timing of the transfer portal kind of coinciding with these COVID classes is probably causing, it's making it a little hard to know exactly how much of an impact it is having. But one area that I wanted to talk about that I got brought up to me and I realized I hadn't really discussed it, and why not discuss it with you as somebody who handles a lot of recruiting conversations, is junior college kids, JUCO. And the Zags haven't had a JUCO kid in about 10 years. And that's not super surprising when you consider the level that the program has ascended to in that time period. But I'm wondering if we're just not seeing them, and that's maybe they're still kind of happening, or if there is less of the junior college kids kind of making it up to the D1 level because of the immediate eligibility in the transfer portal.
You are 100% right. It is
Mhm.
exactly what you just said, and
Yeah.
it's only going to get worse. I'll tell
Yeah.
you, the reality is, because of this. I talked about this yesterday on a podcast, and
Mhm.
because people make I don't know, like,
Mhm.
there has to be a buffer. I
Mhm.
think there has to be something to dissuade kids from just transferring because they're unhappy. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? And I'm not saying every situation is the same, and I
Okay.
don't have all the answers, but
Right.
the reality is, without that,
Mhm.
uh, if it's not a year, I don't know what the answer is, but
Right.
without it, kids are going. It was like 1,400 plus last year. It's going to be 1,600 this year
Yep. Yep.
plus, right? Because the problem with JUCO is now low major and even low mid major
Mhm.
and even mid major schools are replacing them,
Yeah.
because the sell of JUCO is,
Mhm.
man, just come here, get yourself
Mhm.
together,
Yeah.
and then we have the contacts.
Yeah.
They're gonna come looking for you here. Well,
Yeah.
it's easier to sell that they'll come look for you at Radford,
Yeah. Exactly.
a Division I school.
Mhm.
Hey, what if you help us win the conference? Then they don't have to look for you. They might play against you in March.
Yeah.
You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? And
Mhm.
to be very honest with you, low major schools are going into dens of 2-star and 3-star kids
Mhm.
and saying, hey, you can transfer.
Mhm.
Just come here and produce first.
Right.
1 year, you average 16, 17 a game. I promise you, Mark Few is going to
Yep.
give you a call, and
Yep.
guys on his level.
Yep.
Because right now you're not, you gotta bake a little more in the oven. And so that's where
Mhm.
you're gonna do that. You're gonna do that in our league, at our school. You're
Yeah.
gonna help us win the league. We're
Mhm.
gonna get to March, and then we're gonna play against Mark Few. And
Mhm.
Mark said, man, that number, man, he had 20 on us, man. We won, but
Yeah.
ooh, man, keep that, he might be transferring.
Right.
And that's how it works. And
Yeah.
everybody thinks that they're gonna be the guy. They're gonna be the Baylor Shearman,
Yeah.
who gets the call from his childhood team, the Kansas
Mhm.
Jayhawks, right after they win the national title. Now, he didn't go there,
Yeah.
but Bill Self did call him personally. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? We really want you. Can you please get there? Oh my God,
Yeah.
it's Bill Self. I've always wanted this. I
Yeah.
wasn't highly ranked, and but I went to a low level, and look at me now.
Yeah.
And now I got an NIL bidding war. I didn't even talk about that. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? And
Yeah.
now I got an agent. And so everybody thinks they're going to be that. But the
Mhm.
reality is, that's about 30 players in
Yeah.
the portal of 1,400
Yeah.
that are going to have that that high a level of of recruiting.
Yeah.
So I feel terrible for the junior colleges because
Mhm.
they're becoming more and more obsolete.
Yeah.
They are.
Yeah.
It's the hard truth.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, it makes the coaches are going to take advantage of this. If you're Gonzaga and there are great junior college players out there, but if you can get Malachi Smith, who averaged 20 per game in the SoCon, like, you have to do that. You have to go get a guy like that. Like, he's clearly going to be more ready to compete at this level than perhaps some of those junior college guys. And that doesn't mean those junior college guys wouldn't do well necessarily, but you're going to go for the guy. Even like Oregon, I know that they have a couple junior college guys that they brought in, but they also brought in the guard from South Carolina, Kuznard, and they brought in a couple other guys, and they brought in Bartholomew from Colorado. And it's like that those guys are going to probably play over the junior college guys. Who knows what they're going to do over there, but that makes it challenging. And it's unfortunate because I think that the junior college success stories are always stories that I've enjoyed reading about it and hearing about it. And it seems like we're seeing a lot less of them, and it doesn't surprise me that you've seen the same thing.
It's funny you bring that up because I love the Netflix documentaries on the junior college.
Yeah.
I think the last one was a basketball school. So I'm curious if they're going to do one. I wonder if they'll address this in the next season of the basketball one that they do. But they should, because I definitely talk to junior college coaches from time to time, and they say this all the time. They're like, man, they're tying our hands, and what can we do? And I get it, man. It's frustrating. I can definitely understand that.
Yeah. Last question, Jason, before I let you go. Another topic we touched on a little bit, but it's kind of in a similar vein. It's about international recruiting. It's something that I've always been interested in. Gonzaga has a rich history of successful international recruiting. Rui Hachimura, Domantas Sabonis, Roni Turioff. The list goes on and on and on. If you look at the FIBA rosters this summer, there's Zags on basically every single one of them. A big part of the decline of international recruiting at Gonzaga has been the departure of Tommy Lloyd, of course, who was their international recruiter. He's out at Arizona now, having all sorts of success already over there. But I wonder how much the transfer portal is impacting international recruiting, and NIL, and every kind of piece that comes with that. Because again, I don't know how much the decline of international recruiting is just something that I've seen as a Gonzaga fan, or if we have seen less of that because of all this.
I had this conversation last week, funny enough, with the coach, and his take was that schools that it's all going to take a hit, it's the same reason. It's all you go to a gas station and you pay more for a 20-ounce Coke than you do a 2-liter Coke because it's more convenient to hold it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing with the transfer portal. Why am I going to Croatia, Yugoslavia? Why am I going there? Why am I going to Spain? When I can wait till March and watch 10 games and say, oh man, that's a bad man right there. He probably was in the league, bro. Let me find out. And so, it's really just simple math, to be honest with you. But the coach's perspective was that guys like Tommy Lloyd, who have had success looking in, different pockets, and have those ready-made connections in that world, they probably would still delve in there, but it would still be like, well, tell me what you got, but I'm looking at this. You know what I'm saying? Where that wasn't the case before. Right. And so that's the difference. That's the biggest difference.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Jason, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. I really appreciate it. As always, really good to get a chance to kind of talk about some of Gonzaga's upcoming games. It feels like the season is still so far away, but I know that it is getting closer and closer. It's a lot of really good games on Gonzaga's schedule, and I'm glad we got to break some of that down today.
Indeed, man. Glad to be here, as always.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening, and go Zags.